All right. Both say let's begin. So today's daf is daf Chav Zayin. We left off on Chav Vav Amud Beis. So right by the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara Tana, have shaitan v'nituchan shavin bizar. So remember again, the Mishnah mentioned that when it comes to literally the skinning and dismembering of the animals, of the karbanos, shal elu ve'elu shavin. Both these and these are the same, are equivalent. Now Rashi understood that the these and these are actually a reference to communal karbanos and individual karbanos. So the Gemara says, what does it mean that they are the same? Tana have shita v'nituchan shavin bizar. That interestingly enough, when it comes to the skinning and dismembering of sacrificial animals, that it need not be done by a kohen. It can even be done by a non-kohen, by a zar. So the Gemara says, "Minayin, where Amar Chizkiya minayin lahefshit v'nituach sheshava bizar." So Chizkiya says, where do we know this from? Where do we know that you can go ahead and skin the animal and dismember the animal even through a non-kohen? So the Gemara says, "Shne'emar." Chizkiya says, because the pasuk says, "V'nasnu b'nei Aaron hakohen ish ala mizbeach." Because the Torah says that the sons of Aaron will place the fire on the mizbeach. Nesinas eish, it's the placement of fire by a kahuna. That requires kahuna. Hefshet v'nituach lo by a kahuna, but the skinning and dismembering of the animal does not require kahuna. So also what Chizkiya is dashing over here is the Torah goes out of its way to say that the sons of Aaron will place the fire on the mizbeach. So obviously, if it's mentioning that they have to place the fire, it's coming to exclude something else. Chizkiya says, what is it coming to exclude? It's coming to exclude skinning and dismembering. So the Gemara says, 1 second, top of Chav Zayin, Hai mi boile legufei. But you can't do that because of also that pasuk of V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen ish al mizbeach is coming to teach us that very concept, namely that the Kohanim have to be the ones who place the fire on the mizbeach. Look at Rashi, Hai mi boile legufei. Dini boy kohen miuta minalan lahefshit v'nituach. So also remember that pasuk. What the Yoma is going to entertain is the idea that without that pasuk, I would not have necessarily known that it has to be the Kohanim that place the fire on the Mizbeach. I might have thought that it could be someone else. Kamash on the pasuk teaches me it has to be the Kohen. If that pasuk is teaching me that it has to be the Kohen, then that pasuk is not available to teach me that what? That a zar can go ahead and do hefshit v'nituach. Amar of Siyim Bar Ashi says, Ashkachse la'abaye. This is actually, I think this is such a beautiful statement. So Rav Ashi said, I found Abaye dahavi masber lebrei, that Abaye was explaining this concept to his son. I don't know how old his son was at the time when he was explaining this concept, but it's a beautiful image nevertheless. I found Abaye was teaching his son, and what did Abaye say to his son? The Torah says, V'shachat, shchita bizar kshera. So also the Torah says, when speaking about the shechting of a sacrificial animal, it says v'shachat as ben habakar lifnei Hashem. You will shech the ben habakar before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Gemara learns out from there. It doesn't say v'shachat hakohen. It just says v'shachat. It just says v'shachat. So what does v'shachat mean? Shchita bizar kshera. That shchita, which we already learned this earlier, shchita can be done even by a non-kohen. V'chi me'ayin basa. Now I will say, what's the havamina? Now when it's v'chi me'ayin basa, the Gemara is saying is, what's the havamina? What's the havamina to say that shchita is not kshera bizar? Why would I have thought that? Obviously, if the Torah is teaching, if the Gemara is saying that we need a pasuk to teach me that the shchita, sacrificial shchita, can be done by a non-kohen, that means the havamina is that it must have had to have been done by a kohen. Where do I know that from? So the Gemara says, Shne'emar va'ata ubanecha itcha tishmeru esku naschem. Because the pasuk says, talking to Aaron, you and your sons, together with you, will safeguard the covenant of the kahuna. Shomea ani afilu shchita. I might have thought that the covenant of the kahuna even includes shchita, that even a kohen has to go ahead and do shchita. Talmud Lomar, therefore the pasuk says, V'shachat es ben habakar lifnei Hashem, v'krivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es adam. Reposted, listen to this. So the pasuk says, and he will shecht the ben habakar before Hashem. And what happens? And the sons of Aaron will offer up the blood. What do we learn out from this? Mikabala ve'elech mitzvah b'kuhuna. I will say, when does the mitzvah of the kahuna begin? From Kabbalah, from the reception of the blood and on. I'm sorry. From the reception of the blood and on. Remember, Kabbalah is the act right after Shechita. After Shechita, the kohen has to, or somebody has to receive the blood actually within a klishar, it's actually within a sanctified vessel. That's when the mitzvah of kahuna sets in. Only from Kabbalah and on. Pre-Kabbalah, the truth is, there's only one thing before Kabbalah, which ultimately is Shechita, is Kshera Bizar. The Samach Yado, the Shachat. I will say, the Gemara makes a very interesting drasha. The Torah says, the Samach Yado, he will place his hands on top of the carbon, the Shachat, and he will slaughter it. And I will say, Limeid ala Shechita Shekshera Bizar. The Gemara knows the juxtaposition of those phrases. The smicha is done by the owner. The owner, of course, could quite possibly be what? A zar, a non-kohen. The fact that you have the juxtaposition of v'samach to v'shachat teaches me that what? That shchita is kshera bizar. Limid ala shchita b'shekshera bizar. So mostly what comes out from this whole thing is michti mikabala ve'elech mitzvahs kahuna. So also what comes out is the following: that the only time that the kohanim must be part of the service is from Kabbalah and on. From Kabbalah and on, from the receiving of the blood and on, that's the mitzvah b'kahuna. V'nosnu b'nei Aaron lamali. So we'll say, let's go back for just a moment. If it's true that from Kabbalah and on is a mitzvah for the kahuna, then lemaisa, why do I need the pasuk of, there's the pasuk quoted on Amud Beis, V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen ish ala mizbeach, that the sons of Aaron must place the ish on the mizbeach. After all, again, remember, it's obvious that they have to place the ish. Why? Because the Eish comes after Kabbalah. We've just established that anything after Kabbalah has to be done by Kohanim. So why do I need this pasuk? So the pasuk must be coming to exclude something else. What is it coming to exclude? L'meute hefshet v'nituach. What must it come to be excluding? It must come to exclude skinning and dismembering. That what? That those avodos or those things need not to be done by Kohanim, but could even be done by a zar. So the Gemara will say we're on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, right across from Tosfos Ella Mehacha. It's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 lines down from the top. Va'akati itzterich. Now I'll tell you why. I still need the pasuk of V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish ala mizbeach. Why? Because the va'akati itzterich, its pasuk is still necessary. Sakadai t'chamina, I might have thought, kevan delav avoda dime'akva kaparehi lo tibay kahuna. I might have thought that since the placement of the fire on the mizbeach is not what we call an avoda that's ma'akev kapara. It's not an avoda that prevents atonement. Remember, we saw this already back in Pesachim, that although all parts of the avoda are important, not all parts of the avoda are equally as important. Karbanos come to provide what we call kapara, to provide atonement. That's true even with non-sin offerings. Every carbon has a kapara component to it. The point is that there are some things that are ma'akiv kapara, some things that are not ma'akiv kapara. So, for example, the only thing Rashi points out, the only thing that's really ma'akiv kapara is what? Is the zrikas hadam, blood application. It's the application of the blood that really makes or breaks the most. Remember we first saw this by Pesachim. Remember by Pesachim, the halacha was that what happens if before you go ahead and get a chance to eat your carbon Pesach, the carbon becomes tamei. So what's the halacha? Obviously, you don't eat the carbon, but you don't have to do another carbon. Why? Because as long as the blood application was done correctly, then lemais again the carbon is good. So the Gemara says like this: I might have thought that even a zar can place the fire on the mizbeach. Why? Because remember, lemaisa, the placement of the fire is not an avoda that is ma'akev. That is ma'akev, right? It's not ma'akev, meaning we'll say if you forgot it, or for example, we'll see what happens if a non-kohen does it. But it's not ma'akev kapara. So I might have thought that because it's not ma'akev kapara, maybe it doesn't have to be done by a kohen. Kamash malon, that's not the case. The boy kahuna. Elamehacha. Rather, we learn it out from here. So also remember, just keep your eye on the ball. What we're trying to figure out over here is the Mishnah made a statement. And the statement was that the skinning and dismembering of a sacrificial animal need not be done by Kohanim. We are trying to figure out where we learn that out from. So the Gemara says, El mehacha, maybe there's another source. So remember, right now, the Gemara was positing that we learn it out from the pasuk of V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish ala mizbeach. that the sons of Aaron will place the fire on the Mizbeach. Now, we've already established that pasuk is superfluous. Why is it superfluous? Because we've already established that anything from Kabbalah and on has to be done by Kohanim. If anything from Kabbalah and on has to be done by Kohanim, then Lamaisa what? Then Lamaisa that includes in the Sinas Ha'esh. If so, why does the pasuk have to teach me this? It must be coming to exclude something else. What is it coming to exclude? Hefshit v'nituach. It's coming to exclude the skinning and the dismembering. To which the Gemara said, well, maybe not. Maybe the pasuk is necessary. Why? Because I might have thought that you don't need a kohen to go ahead and do nesinas ha'ish. Why? Because it's not ma'akif. Kamashalon, the kohen has to do nesinas ha'ish. Therefore, the Gemara said, let's bring another possibility. Va'aruchu b'nei Aaron ha'kohanim es hanesachim es harosh ve'es ha'pader. What does the pasuk say? That the sons of Aaron will arrange the sacrificial pieces, the head and the fats on the Mizbeach. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, Michti, now why do we need this? Why do I need this pasuk? After all, Mikabala ve'elich mitzvahs kahuna va'archu lamali. Now I will say, remember, what have we already established? We've already established that from Kabbalah, the receiving of the blood and on, has to be done by Kohanim. If that's the case, then what? That this entire pasuk is extra. Why does the pasuk have to tell me that a kohen has to arrange the sacrificial pieces on the mizbeach? That's a part of the service post Kabbalah. But we've already established post Kabbalah has to be done through kohanim. So the pasuk is extra. So what is it coming to? Salamali. Why is it here? Lemeute. It must be coming to exclude something. And what is it coming to exclude? Hefshit v'nituach. It's coming to exclude the skinning and dismembering of the animal. That those processes need not be done by a kohen. I think so maybe not. Maybe it's coming to exclude Rabbosai the arrangement of the two pieces of wood. Remember, we've already established that by the that by the tamid, so they would bring up two additional pieces of wood for the ma'arach. There was already a fire burning there, already an established fire. There was a mitzvah to bring two additional pieces of wood. Maybe the pasuk is coming to exclude that and to tell me that the two additional pieces of wood need not be brought by Kohanim. To which the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you why. If this is going to be an exclusion, mistabra divcha de kavasi mimayit, it would appear that the miot would come to be mimayit something similar to the subject of the pasuk. And I will say, just like the subject of the pasuk is something intrinsic in the karban itself, i.e. the arrangement of the heads and the fats, so too the exclusion must be something intrinsic in the body, in the physicality of the karban itself, such as skinning and dismembering, but not arrangement of wood, which is something extraneous to the karban. To which the Gemara says, well, maybe not. Adirava, sidur de kavasi memait. Maybe not. On the other hand, what is the pasuk talking about? The pasuk is talking about arranging things on the mizbeach. Maybe the exclusion is also talking about what? Arranging things on the mizbeach. In this case, what would be referring to? The shnei gizreitzim, the two pieces of wood. So the Gemara says, lo, sakadait chad amar mar, vehikriv hakoin es hakol hamizbecha. The Torah says that the kohen will offer up everything on the mizbeach. What does this refer to? Zu holachas evarim lekevesh. This refers to the taking of the limbs to the ramp of the mizbeach. Holachas evarim lekevesh hu debaya kuhuna. What do we see from here? It's the taking of the limbs to the ramp that require a kohen. Holachas eitzim lo baya kuhuna. Oh, but Abosai, the taking of the wood to the mizbeach does not require kuhuna. Now, Abosai, remember, there are two different types of taking of wood. Remember, on the mizbeach itself, there was a pyre. There was a whole stack of wood that they used to burn, that they would burn the karbanos on. That does not require a Yisrael, a kohen, as we'll see. We'll see what you have to do with that. But apparently, Yisraelim can bring that wood to the top of the mizbeach as well. However, sidur shnei gizrei eitzim bayakuna. But Rabbi say, you know what does require kohanim? The bringing of the two additional pieces of wood. That requires a kohen. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, va'archu lamali. So the Rabbi say, why do I need the pasuk of va'archu? Remember, this is the pasuk of va'archu b'nei Aaron. Where was this pasuk quoted? We quoted just a little bit above. That the sons of Aaron will arrange the sacrificial pieces, the head and the fats of the mizbeach. Why do I need that? Oh, because that comes to exclude what? Skinning and dismembering. What that's telling me is that remember, everything comes back to the idea that these psukim are extraneous. Why? Because once I establish that avoda from Kabbalah and on must be done through Kohanim, then Lemaisa, again, everything else becomes extraneous. If it's extraneous, it's only there to be mama'id something. The Gemara suggests he's going to be mama'id hefshit v'nituach. Ve'ema hachinami legufei. But maybe not. Maybe the pasuk is coming to teach me the very meaning. No, maybe the pasuk actually needs to teach me that the kohen has to bring up the head and the fats. Ella vehiktir kohen esakol lemay. But if that's the case, then what about the phrase that the kohen has to burn everything on the mizbeach? Why do I need that phrase? So the Gemara says, oh, maybe that's the phrase that comes to exclude what? The skinning and dismembering of the animal. So I will say, now we go back. When the Torah says that the kohen will go ahead and offer up everything on the mizbeach, zu holachas evarim lekevesh. This refers ultimately to the taking of the limbs to the ramp. Holachas evarim lekevesh hu debaya kahuna. Holachas eitzim lo baya kahuna. So we'll say, what do we see from here? That the taking of the limbs to the ramp, that requires a kohen, but yet the taking of the wood to the mizbeach does not require a kohen. Hasidur shnei gizrei eitzim baya kahuna. As I will say, the arrangement of the two pieces of wood on the mizbeach does in fact require kahuna. V'nosnu. What do we do with v'nosnu? So we'll say, now we're going back to the original pasuk quote on Amud Beis, on Chav Vav Amud Beis. V'nosnu legufei. So we'll say, now we go back. V'nosnu, that was the pasuk says v'nosnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen ishal mizbeach. That comes to teach me that what? Literally, I need that to teach me the very essence of the pasuk. That halacha l'maisa, a kohen must arrange a fire on the mizbeach. Va'aruchu. Now, when we go back to the second pasuk of va'aruchu b'nei Aaron, what does it come to teach me? Va'aruchu shnayim. I will say, now the pasuk that says that the kohanim have to arrange the head and the fats on the mizbeach is phrased in the plural. So the Gemara says this: va'aruchu shnayim. Aruchu is two. B'nei Aaron shnayim. B'nei Aaron is two. HaKohanim shnayim. Kohanim is two. Lamadnu litala shetaun shisha. What do we learn from here? We learn from Rabbi said that the sheep. Now the sheep is a reference to the carbon tamid. Requires 6 kohanim. Now, obviously, we already learned the tamid requires more than 6 kohanim. But for these particular parts, the tala requires 6 kohanim. So the Gemara says only one problem. Amar of Hamnuna kashile l'Rebbe Elazar hay b'ben bakar ksid. There's only one problem about saying that the pasuk of v'nosnu that the Gemara is darshaning over here, or excuse me, v'aruchu that the Gemara is darshaning over here is not referring to the carbon tamid, but rather it's referring to a ben bakar. It's referring to cattle that's offered up, and cattle is offered up with 24 kohanim. So the Gemara says v'nei chalev. Rabbi Elazar will answer this, and he will say the following: Al ha'itzim asher al ha'ish asher la mizbeach. The pasuk says, this is Rosa here. The Gemara is talking. Gemara is quoting the pasuk actually by the carbon tamid. By the tamid it says ala eitzim, it has to be on the wood. That's on the eish. That's on the mizbeach. Ezehu davar shene'emar bo eitzim eishu mizbeach. What is another matter by which it says the phrases or the words eitzim eish mizbeach, wood fire mizbeach? Have Amud Beis, have Omer Zetala. I would say this also refers to the sheep. So I'll say what Rabbi Elazar does essentially over here is that it's not really, I wouldn't really call it a Gzeir Shava, but what he does is he finds that there are the exact same words are used by the Tala, by the carbon tamid, as well as by offerings of cattle. So what Rabbi Elazar uses that to mean is the following: that essentially the plural. The fact that the plural is used by both Ben Bakar as well as Tal as well as Carbon Tamid allows me to learn things out one from the other. Specifically, that there are multiple Kohanim involved. Granted, the number of Kohanim by each one are different, but nevertheless, the plural Lashon allows me to understand this is not a one coin service. So, for example, by the cattle you have 24 Kohanim, but by the sheep, Rebbe Elazar understands the most basic understanding of plural. Aruchu is 2, Bnei Aaron is 2, Kohanim is 2. Tells you that by definition there's a minimum of 6 kohanim involved in the Tala in the Talmud service. Okay. Amar Rabbi Abasi, Rabbi Yochanan. So I will say, first of all, you should know just what comes out from this particular sugya is that halacha l'maisa we do paskin that hefshit v'nituach is kshera bizar. That literally the skinning and dismembering of sacrificial animals need not be done by Kohanim. It can be done even by non-Kohanim. We also pass in the concept that mikabala ve'elech mitzvah v'kahuna, that everything from Kabbalah and on is ultimately done by the Kohanim. That's why we pass in Shechita is Kshera Bizar. You could have the Shechita of sacrificial animals can be done by a non-Kohen, because we accept also that drasha of the Samach v'Shachat. Those who could do Smicha, which is anyone, any owner of the animal, can ultimately do Shechita as well. But we do paskin, however, we're not question of paskin. Torah explicitly says it, that it is the Kohanim who go ahead and place the Eish on the Mizbeach, even though what? Sometimes the Eish itself may be done even before the slaughtering of the animal. Nevertheless, the Maisa, again, it's the Kohanim who must do the Shechita. Okay, so the Gemara moves on to a separate topic. To the placement of the fire on the Mizbeach. Thank you. Amar Abasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Zar Shesidir Sama'arocha Chayiv. So we'll say another halacha. A non-Kohen who went ahead and established the Ma'aracha. And I will say, what does it mean? Ma'aracha is the pyre, we spoke about earlier. So remember how pyres, of course, everybody makes pyres, right? So you know how pyres are made. I'm sure there's a here's like a Boy Scout or something, right? So it's like the crisscross. You have wood going one way, wood going another way, wood going another way. So there's got to be a name for that. Okay, we're Jewish. What do we know from these things? We hire someone to build these things. Okay, so the Gemara says the following: So we'll say if you have a non-Kohen who set up the ma'aracha, it's a very interesting case. So now a non-Kohen went ahead and he didn't kindle the fire; he just set up the wood. So the Gemara says, Rav Asi and Rabbi Yochanan, chayiv. He's chayiv misa. So we'll say apparently again we'll see if we pass him like this. But Rav Asi and Rabbi Yochanan, apparently the arrangement of the ma'aracha is in and of itself an avoda, and therefore if a zar does it, then ultimately he's chayiv misa. Keitzeruo says, so what should a zar do? So we'll say, let's say, so obviously if he's chayiv misa, the pashtus what it means is that the ma'aracha that he made is also not a valid ma'aracha. So what should he do? Keitzeruo parka, he should take it apart, v'chozer v'sudra, and he should put it back together. So the says, what are you talking about? My ahanile. What good does it do if the same Yisrael who built it takes it apart and rebuilds it? Tush Gemara says, no. Ella parka zar v'sodra kohen. No, rather, what has to happen? If a non-kohen built the ma'aracha, what has to happen over here is the zar can take it apart. Also, the idea is the kohen doesn't have to disassemble it. The Yisrael can disassemble it, but what? The kohen must reassemble it, and that would allow the ma'aracha to be properly used. So Mar says, "Maskif Rabbi Zera." Rabbi Zera says, 1 second. Is there such a thing as an avoda that is done at night, and yet is psula bizar, and yet can't be done by a non-kohen? So let's remember the arrangement of the ma'aracha was done at night. So Mar says again, is there such a thing as an avoda that's kshera bizar, that is done at night, but not kshera bizar? So the Mar says, really? There's not velo bahari evarim upedarim. What are you talking about? There's the burning of the leftover limbs and fats, and Rabosai again. Remember that's done at night, and yet what? And is only kosher b'kohen. Zar not kohen can't do it. Rabosai. The Gemara's question is predicated upon is there's no real avoda at night. There's no real avoda at night. There's no mandatory avoda is only by day. Truth is, there's no. To give us our contemporary example, it's the same way that there's no obligation of prayer at night. We have Mariv is a rishus. That's because again, there's no corresponding obligatory sacrificial service at night. So the Gemara's assumption is because there's no avoda at night, anything done at night is not really called an avoda. And therefore, if it's not really called an avoda, then what? Then even if you don't want a Yisrael to do it, if he does do it, he certainly shouldn't what? He certainly shouldn't be chayiv misa. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? We do have avodas at night. What about the burning of the fats and limbs? And that has to be done by a kohen.
What made the sign of Trumas and Desha? Because we went through this with Trumas and Desha.
Well, so Baruch Kivan, the Gemara is going to ask it. We're going to see that. So the Gemara says, "V'hari vari pidarim." What about the burning of the fats and limbs? That's something that's done at night, and yet can only be done by a kohen. For which the Gemara says it's not a good raya. Sof avoda di yamamahi. No. That is that we don't consider that nighttime avoda. You know what we consider that? That's overtime, right? That's overtime. That's daytime avoda. Because remember, I will say essentially what ended up happening is they would have burned the leftover fats and limbs during the day, but what? There's no time. There's no time. So therefore, even though it takes place technically at night, it's considered to be the completion of the daytime service. So the Gemara says, what about, and therefore that's not a good raya of a nighttime service. What about, like Ben Tion just mentioned, V'hari Trumas Hadeshen. What about Trumas Hadeshen? Right, also remember, we already established a couple of days ago that Trumas Hadeshen is done when? It's done before daybreak, which means it's done at night. And yet what? And yet Lamaisa, again, it's considered to be an avodah. They did a pious for it. There was Kohanim, which we assume. So you see, there is an avodah that night, to which Gemara says, no, it's not a good raya. Tchilas avodah di yamamahi. Even though it's done technically at night, it's still considered what? The beginning of the daytime avodah. The Amar Abasi, Amar Yochanan, I will say, we learned this earlier. Kidesh yadav l'trumas hadeshen. If the Kohen went ahead and did Kiddush Na'v Raglaim, he washed his hands and feet for Trumas Hadeshen, L'machar, the next day, Eno Tzarech L'Kadesh. He need not sanctify them again, Shekvar Kiddush Mitchilas Avoda, because you already sanctified them from the beginning of the Avodah. Remember, we'll say, what does next day mean over here? Next day means daybreak. Daybreak, same calendrical date. Gemara is calling daybreak the next day. So what do we see over here? That Lamais again, that Trumas. So let's translate this. That if he sanctified his hands and feet for Trumas Hadeshen, when the sun comes up, he does not have to do another Kiddush Na'v Raglaim, another sanctification. Why? Because he's already sanctified his hands and feet mitchilas avoda, from the beginning of that day's avoda. So what do you see from there? That Trumas Hadeshen, although it takes place at night, is really what? Is really considered the beginning of the daytime avoda. So therefore, the Gemara has not successfully proven that there's a concept of nighttime avoda. Because remember, the two examples that the Gemara brought up were, number one, the burning of the burning of leftover limbs and fats, and the Gemara says that's not nighttime avodah. What is that called? That's called daytime. That you didn't get a chance to do. That's called overtime, but that's an extension of the day. Trumas Hadeshen is also nighttime, not nighttime. What is that? The beginning of the daytime. You're just getting an early start, which is called Tchilas Hayom. So therefore, both like we're back. Remember what we're trying to understand. Rabbi Yochanan made a very dramatic statement that if a non-Kohen arranged the Mizbeach pyre, that he's chayiv misa. The Gemara says, but what are you talking about? This is an avoda balayla, which is not really real avoda, and therefore it should be ksheira bizarre. So the Gemara says, ve'ela kashya. But rather again, we're still stuck ultimately with our kash. Rashi says, ve'ela kashya, v'chi yesh lecha avoda shekshera balayla shepsula bizarre. So our original question still stands, which is there such a thing as a nighttime avoda that can't be done by a non-Kohen? Because the assumption is nighttime avoda is not really avoda. If it's not really avoda, then lamais again it should be kshera bizarre. Ela ki itmar hachi itmar. Rather, here's what you have to say. Amar Abasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Zar shesider shnei gizrei eitzim chayiv. Oh, so rather Rabbi Yochanan wasn't talking about the pyre. Rather, what was he talking about? The Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Rabbi said, what's the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim? We had this on Amar Aleph. This is the bringing of the additional 2 pieces of wood during the carbon tummy. That's part of the avoda. So if a zar does that, then he's chayiv misa. Why? Hoil va'avodas yomhi. Because the Maisa, again, it is part and parcel of the daytime service. Says, look at Rashi for just a moment. Va'avodas yomhi. Because the Torah says that the Kohen will burn wood on the Mizbeach each and every morning, and that wood is not a reference to the general pyre, that wood is a reference to the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Maskif le Rava, but Rava brings a kasha, Eleme'ato tibai pais. Oh, so if that's the case, that the bringing of the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim, the 2 pieces of wood, is really an avoda, then what Rava says should it require? It should require a lottery, right? It should require a lottery. So also listen to this. So the Gemara says, Ishtamite ha disanya. Apparently, Rava wasn't paying attention in Shir. Right? Literally, Ishtamite ha disanya means Rava must have forgotten his brisa. Because what does the brisa say? Misha zacha b'trumas hadeshen, zacha b'sidor ma'aracha, u'b'sidor shnei gizrei eitzim. Oh, because the brisa says explicitly what Rabbi say, that the bringing of the 2 pieces of wood was part of the payis. It was part of the lottery. Again, it doesn't get his own lottery, but whoever ultimately received the privilege of setting up the ma'aracha, whoever received the privilege of Trumas Hadeshin, clearing off the ash, also got the opportunity to set up the pyre, as well as the bringing of the two pieces of wood. But as I take a look at Rashi, actually not yet, I'm sorry. So the Gemara says, Lamemra, is that to say, the avodas yom baya payis, the avodas laila lo baya payis? So we'll say again, so now what comes out Lamaisa, just so you understand what we've done now, is we've done a little bit of an about face on Rabbi Yochanan Shita. We originally thought that Rabbi Yochanan was talking about the pyre on the Mizbeach. It turns out that he was not. He was not talking about the pyre on the Mizbeach. Rather, he was talking about the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. And the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim is part of the Avoda, part of the daily Avoda. B'haraya, it's part of the Payis, it's part of the actual lottery of the Trumas Hadeshen. And therefore, if a non-Kohen did it, he would be Chayev Misa. So the Gemara now says, are you telling me that Avodas Yom Baya Payis, Avodas Ayalo Baya Payis? Are you telling me then that it's only daytime Avoda that requires a lottery, but nighttime avoda does not? What about v'hari evarim upidarim? So we'll say, what about the burning of the sacrificial limbs and sacrificial fats? Where apparently the Gemara says that Lamaisa, again, there was some type of pious for that as well, and yet that's a nighttime avoda. To which the Gemara says, excuse me, avodas yom by pious was by pious, sof avoda diyamami. So the Gemara gives the same answer. Why do you keep bringing up a varm and pedarim? Just because it happens at night, it's not called the night. This is interesting. It's not called the nighttime avoda. What is it called? It's called a daytime avoda that you didn't have time to do during the day, so you're doing it at night. What about Trumas Hadeshen? What about Trumas Hadeshen? Which I will say is a nighttime avoda. But Lemaisa, again, there's still a pious for it. So it's interesting. The Gemara could have just given the same answer as it gave before, which was what? It's Tchilas Hayom. It's the beginning of the day. But the Gemara doesn't. Instead, what the Gemara says, Mishum Maise Shahaya. So the Gemara says, no, the reason we need a pious for the Trumas Hadeshen is why? Because we learned it, because of the Maise Shahaya, because the Kohanim were getting a little bit aggressive with each other. So we need the pious to regulate things. The Memra. So now, are we to say, based on this conversation, the avodas yom, v'shezar chayiv ala misa, baya pais, ein zar chayiv ala misa, lo baya pais. Now, what you're telling me is that in order for an avoda to be subject to the lottery requirement, it must satisfy two criteria. Number one, that it has to be done by day. And number two, it's the kind of avoda that if a non-Kohen would do it, he'd be chayiv misa. So if an avoda satisfies those two criteria, daytime avoda and death to a zar if he does it, then lemaisa, again, that's what's subject to the pious. But if you don't satisfy those two criteria, then you're not decided by lottery. V'hari shchita. What about shchita? Shiny shchita. So look at Rashi will say. What about shchita? So look at. No, not yet. I'm sorry. So what about shchita? And I will say, interestingly enough, when it comes to shchita, so shchita is an avoda bayom. Yet what? Yet a zar is not chayiv if he does it. The zar can do shchita, but yet what Rabbi say? Yet it is included in the lottery. Right? Remember again when they did the lottery for the carbon tamid, so they also remember how they decided it, that the individual who actually got the lot for the shchita, that was the one who they drew the lot from. Then his 12 buddies to his right got the rest of it. So what do you see from here? That it's not true. That even an avoda that is kshera bizar, they still drew lots for. To which the Gemara says, no. Shiny shchita, the tchilas avodahi. Shchita is different. Why? Because shchita is the beginning of the avoda. All right. So apparently, because the shechita is the beginning of the avoda, it has a chashivus onto itself, which therefore makes it subject to the lottery requirement. Even though what, technically speaking, it's kshera bizar.
It's not an avoda. Just beginning. It's not avoda. It's not.
It is avoda. It is avoda. It should happen. Remember, we're going to see that it doesn't have to be as black. Something could be an avoda even if it's kshera bizar. That's what we're going to see. So the Gemara says, Omer Zutra, V'tim Ravashi, V'ha anan lo tinan hachi. But did we not learn the following? Amar lahem hamamuna. The mamuna, remember that also the mamuna is the guy who's in charge of the kohanim. He used to say to them, S'u u're'u im higia zman hashchita. He would tell them, go up and see if the time of the shchita had already arrived. Look at Rashi. Look at Rashi. Im igiyuz man hashchita, im heir hamizrach ve'es lishchot es atmidin, shashchita psula balayla. So we'll see this later on. Mishnah will say that the mamuna, let's say the sky Kohen, God bless you, whoever it was in charge of the Kohanim. So he would say, go up, ascend to a high place, and see if it's daybreak yet. Because we could only shech the carbon tamid of the morning once it was day. But obviously, if they shechted it before day, the mice of the carbon would be possible. So they would tell them, go up and see if the Zman Shechita had arrived. V'ilu Zman Shnei Gizrei Eitzim Lo Katani. But yet, interestingly enough, there was the Memuna, the individuals in charge of the Kohanim, never sent them to see if what? If the time for the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim had arrived. They both say you could only bring the Ma'aracha you could set up at night. But the two pieces of wood to be brought to the Mizbeach had to be done by day. So the Gemara points out that it's interesting that the Mamuna would tell them to check for daylight by the carbon tamid, but would not tell them to check for daylight by the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. So why not? So the Gemara says, very simple. Hach the less late takanta katani. Hach the is late takanta lo katani. I will say because the Gemara says there's a very simple reason. Because I will say the carbon tamid, if you shechted it and you were wrong, then what? There's no takana. You can't remedy that mistake. But if you accidentally put the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Mizbeach and it turned out that what? That it was really nighttime, then what? Guess what? Good news. There's a remedy. What do? You pull it off the Mizbeach and you can put it back on once it's daybreak afterwards. Look at Rashi. The Islay Takanta im Sidran Balayla Parkan v'chozer v'sodran bayom. If you accidentally put the two pieces of wood on the Mizbeach at night, you remove them and you go ahead and put them back during the day. Lekach lo hitrichu la'alos legag liros im higia she'osat in the migia. Therefore, the Mamuna did not trouble the Kohen to go up to the roof of the Beis Hamikdash to see if day had actually dawned. She'osat torach lo hitrichu ela b'pam achos. Allah me'or halavana v'dimu shaheir mizrach v'shachtu astam kidiktarni la'per gimel. Aval sidur gizirin sidura bekarka azara mishira mizrach ve'imta'a b'mor halavana lo ichbas lahu shariyesh takana b'davar. So we'll say again, we'll actually see later on that one of the reasons they actually ascended to the rooftop also the Beis Hamikdash was because one time it actually happened that they mistook the light of the moon for daybreak and they shechted the carbon tamid. After that episode, the Mamuna would tell the Kohanim to go up to the roof or to some high place to see had the dawn really dawned or not. So when it comes to carbon tamid, for which if you make a mistake, the consequences are irreversible. You've shechted a carbon for no reason, and it's an invalid carbon, which is problematic in and of itself. Shnei Gizrei Eitzim didn't make them go up to see if the dawn had already dawned, because let me say, what's the worst case scenario? If you're wrong, you'll just take it off the Mizbeach. So we'll say again, we're going to stop over here for today, but Lamaisa again, we have not resolved our core issue, which is Lamaisa again, what exactly do we do? What's the criteria? What's the criteria for an avoda for which a zar will be chayev for performance? Well, so just in 1 minute, I just want to share with you something very interesting. There's a fascinating concept. It's back in yesterday's daf. So we saw in yesterday, the Gemara quoted the idea of the Ketores, that they would go ahead for it was the third pious. Was it the third pious? Yeah, the third pious was for the Ketores. So if you remember again, the Mishnah quoted the idea that they would make the announcement, whoever has never partaken in the whoever has not participated in the Ketores should come forward and do it. So the Gemara says, because again, the Kohanim at most got one opportunity to go ahead and take part of it. So what's interesting is the Ramah quotes in Yardeh, quotes the Mariel. This is in Siman Reish Samechei Sef Yud Aleph. Quotes the idea in the name of Rabbeinu Peretz that the sandik, right, the person who holds the baby during the bris milah is kemaktir ketores, is like a person who's offering ketores, and therefore the Ramah paskins lochein ein litin shnei banav lesandik echad. Therefore, a person should not use the same sandik twice. Right now, listen to this. So what's interesting is the Nota B'Yehuda has a whole tshuva about this. Where do you get this idea that bris milah is like ketores? So he quotes the medrash that says that when Avraham Avinu circumcised his entire household, What he did is, all right, the image itself might not be the prettiest, but you'll understand the message. He made a pile of arlos, a pile of foreskins, and like I said, just roll with me with this, right? So now the Gemara says that when the sun came out, they began to disintegrate, and the Medrash says that the smell was like ketores before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Medrash here creates ultimately the link between bris milah and ketores. So the Noda B'Yehuda says this is where the Ramah gets this idea that the sandik is kemaktir ketores, because Lamais, again, the connection, and therefore, again, the same way that the Kohen went ahead and only did the ketores once in order to be able to share that opportunity with others, the Mariel Paskins, that a person, if they've already been a sandik, if there's someone else who has never done it, they should give that opportunity to someone else, that they should have the opportunity for sandekos. Now, just to end with this, he quotes over here also, the Noda B'Yehuda quotes from the Sefer Makar Chesed, which is in the Sefer HaChasidim, that says the following. He quotes it by Ketores and by Sandik, that there were many Kohanim who did the Ketores, but did not become rich. And there were many people who were a Sandik and did not become wealthy. So what's the pshat? And he quotes over from the Sefer HaChasidim something beautiful. He says, Klapi Mashamar, She'ena Kavana, Dafka La'ashirus Mamon. The Kavana here is not for literal monetary wealth, through Ketores or through Sandekus. Ella, Shezochim Lemidas Hestapkus. What do you get from the Ketores? What do you get from being a Sandik? You get the bracha of satisfaction. V'hu sameach bechelko. Rabbos, I remember, the greatest bracha of wealth cannot be measured in what you have. The greatest bracha of wealth is the ability to appreciate what you have and not to constantly pine after what you don't. V'hu sameach bechelko. Sha'az hu ashir be'emes. That is true wealth. Ki asher hameduma einomes v'chatzi ta'avasa biyado. Because also we know if a person measures their wealth in what they acquire, then a person ultimately is never wealthy. A person is only wealthy when ultimately they appreciate the brachos that they have, and don't spend their time yearning for what they don't. So amazingly enough, what comes out of here is halach. Just so you see, is halach l'maisa application. That the sandik ultimately, if he's already done it, he should give the opportunity to someone else based on the ketores. And the Noda B'Yehuda telling us that the ultimate bracha in ketores, as well as the ultimate bracha in sandekos, might not be measured in the actual windfall of material wealth that you have, but somehow engaging in these avodos creates a spiritual sensitivity. And it's a spiritual sensitivity that teaches a person the midah of appreciation. And it's the midah of appreciation that ultimately paves the way for true life wealth. All right, stop over there.
It's called a pyramid.
A pyramid. Good? A pyramid. Okay.
They would bring up the shnekes ready, so they wouldn't burn them right away.
They are burnt with the tummy.
I think that's the reason the Sephardim do it. The Sami by the priest.
So, could be. It could be based on the Ketores. Beautiful. Beautiful. Don't Sephardim also do it?